All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Alex Neely. We're at his home in Portland. It's July 13th, 2020. Alex, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for being here.
First question, most important question today, why wine?
Really, just a lack of direction in another career path. So I got into wine. I was taking a side odd job, trying to go in a different direction that ended up ultimately failing. And while I was working the side job, it was a fancy cheese and wine shop in DC. That was just kind of there as a stopgap. But the guy who ran the program was one of them fancy somms, and I was the only employee that was willing to listen to him speak at length. So I learned a lot from him. He opened up tons of bottles. I started getting into it, and I'm like, hey, this is a really neat world I didn't know existed beyond, Menage a Trois and other random grocery store brands. So then when my other path ultimately ended, I was like, well, hey, what the hell do I do? So I was like, hey, I'll get on this wine train. And then I was in Portland, and I got a 3-month stock boy job at New Season, stocking beer and wine, again as a stopgap, and looking for something else. Ended up at Foster & Dobbs, now defunct. And I was the wine buyer and cheesemonger and just general buyer for, I want to say, 2 years maybe, which was lovely. I was big into cheese as well. Same thing from DC. I learned so much about cheese. And so we had a huge, case, whole wheel cut to order, over 100 cheeses any given time, buying direct through distributors. It was fantastic. I loved it. Cheese really was my love at that point, but also I was getting into wine at the same time, meeting a lot of local winemakers and, learning a lot through the reps and going to all the luncheons and stuff that they did. And it came a point in my life where I was like, hey, I don't really want to stay in retail anymore. I want to produce things. I want to make my own mark. And I didn't know if I wanted to go the cheese or the wine route. And then the legend that I tell is one day I was riding the bus home, and I was like, hey, what's that smell? And then I was like, oh my God, I'm that guy on the bus that smells like cheese. And I was like, okay, let's go into wine. I'd rather smell like a wino than some cheese guy. And so that was kind of the pivotal moment where I was like, okay, I'm going to go into production. So I called up a couple of the people whose wines I respected the most in Oregon. And I ended up landing with Barnaby Tuttle and Teutonic Wines in the very beginning of 2014. And stayed with him until, what would it be, March of 2020, so just recently. So I was the assistant winemaker there for that period of time. And in 2015, Barnaby gave me the opportunity to start making small batches of my own wine every year. So Libertine started in 2015 with a little over 2 barrels. And we have slowly built from there to, I think, our production in our release in March of 2020 was about 500 cases or so. And so hopefully next year we'll plan to do closer to 1,000. But we've slowly built it up over the years, and now we distribute to Oregon, Washington, DC, Maryland, Virginia, Chicago, Alberta, Canada. And then we have 5 more that we will start supplying in the next spring. And so we are very, very excited about that.
That's a lot for 500 cases.
It is, but what's nice is that, the wine hits these markets and then it's just gone immediately. And so we're kind of like a hit it and quit it brand. It shows up for about 2 months, and if you don't get in on it, it's gone. And that's kind of where I like to be as well.
So how did you get from DC to Oregon?
I moved out here when I was 18 to attend Reed College. I graduated from Reed and didn't leave except for a short stint in 2011 when I was back there when I was working at that cheese store, cheese and wine store.
So what made you want to stay in Oregon?
I love the culture here. It's the reason I came out in the beginning. I had the choice of either going to one of many liberal arts colleges in the Northeast, where I would still be on the Eastern Seaboard, or, throw caution into the wind and go all the way across the country. I never shy away from just going balls out and being like, I'm just going to do this. So I decided just to up and leave, and I just love the culture out here. It's 180 degrees different from the East Coast. East Coast is, fuck you, me first. And out here is, let's do this together. Mm-hmm. So I like the camaraderie spirit for sure. Also on that note, as a tangent, when I left Foster and Dobbs to go into production, I just up in one day gave my notice at my job without telling my wife, and came home and said, hey, I quit my job today. And she said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. I'll figure it out. And she was like, well, you better figure it out in the next 2 weeks. Which I ended up doing. So I ended up stopgapping that.
It's good to have deadlines.
Yeah. Well, I found that, unless you jump in head first into things, you can say you're going to do something forever, but you'll never get around to it until your hand is forced. So I try to do things that force my own hand.
So tell me about the process of learning wine. You mentioned kind of working with a somm who was imparting a lot of knowledge, opening a lot of wines for you. Tell me about what about wine intrigued you as a product before you started making it.
The varied expressions of the exact same varietal based on location as well as winemaker technique. I found it to be infinitely fascinating. It works the same way as mezcal. There's so much at play that can make so many things so different and yet so similar at the same time that I find it completely endearing. Also, things that I like to do are things that are impossible to be good at. Like, it's why I play golf. You're never really going to be a master, but you can sure as shit have fun on the way. And I like the idea of the unattainable. And slowly moving somewhere closer to that. It's like I always tell my daughter, it's not practice makes perfect, it's practice makes slightly better. And that's something I live by. And another Lee Trevino quote, the more I practice, the luckier I get. So
tell me about Teutonics. Tell me about your experience working there and learning production in that way.
So it's fascinating what Barnaby's been able to do. He started with just about nothing and built his way up to what it is today, which is incredibly impressive. I think what he's done with the Riesling grape and making it known throughout Oregon and recognized for it is extremely, as a vague modifier, important. I think it's a wonderful thing that he's done for Riesling. And Riesling is why I got into wine again, why I specifically reached out to Barnaby. And the way he does it is, I didn't know this beforehand or going in or anything, but it's so complicated and yet so simple. It's magical in that way. Barnaby was the inspiration to me, being like, hey, I can do this on my own, without the backing of some venture capitalist or some surgeon who's retired and now needs to put some, money in a holding place in some vineyard or winery. You can do this as an individual. It's not just relegated to the elite. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons for me.
You mentioned simple yet complicated, or complicated yet simple, however you want to look at it. Tell me about the learning the process of making wine and how it spoke to you. What about the process intrigued you?
I think a lot of it is pushing your body to the limits during harvest. As winemakers, we have very busy times of year and very slow times of year. And when it's busy, it's fucking crazy. And when it's not, it's just, you go on vacation to Mexico. It's like there's a lot of free time to do what you want, but when the work is required of you, you bust your ass. And I didn't realize, again, before I got into it, I didn't realize how many logistical issues are involved, how it requires an immense amount of focus with all of your energy that's spent. It's just an all-in experience.
So as you were able to make your own wine starting in 2015, what did you set out to make? What did you set out to express?
Riesling. Again, I wanted to show different expressions of Riesling in Oregon. Everybody, when you think of the Willamette Valley, you think of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and Pinot Gris maybe. And we're such a young wine region, I think it would be incredibly arrogant to think that's the answer. Other places think they have the answer, and it's probably not, and they've been at it for thousands of years. Are we a Pinot Noir region? Probably not. What are we? I don't know. Does anybody else know? Will they figure something out in the next couple hundred years? Probably. And so I'm just going to chase the dragon and do as many crazy things as I can while I have the chance, because it's not like making beer. This is nothing against brewers, but it's not like making beer where it's like, oh, I'll just make another batch today because I feel like it. You get one chance a year, and that's it. So what? I probably have 30 harvests left in me, maybe, probably less. And when you think about it that way, it's like you want to make everything count. So I started off with Riesling, the varied expressions. A lot of the Riesling that's made in Oregon is either late harvest, super sweet and cloying for a certain market, or it's just regular harvest, as dry as they can probably get it, or just slightly off dry again for the guy's wife who's buying all the Pinot. And I was like, there's got to be a different way. So, I've been screwing around with Riesling and different expressions, and so I tend to age mine a lot longer than most people. It started off by accident, because my 15 I aged longer because I was terrified of starting my own brand and all the paperwork and bottling it and putting it out there. And then after I did it, I was like, hey, great, this is a wonderful expression. I'm going to start doing this every year. So what I do is I age it in barrel for the better part of a year. Neutral oak on the gross lees, leave it in barrel until right before the next harvest, bottle it, and then don't release it until the next spring. And I found that the barrel age and the time in bottle, it gives it a completely unique expression. And again, it's not. Is it Oregon Riesling? Yes. Is it the Oregon Riesling we know? No. But you know what? I think we should always challenge what we consider the norm. And am I going to be able to sell it? Is it going to ruin my business? Maybe, maybe not, but I'm still going to do it. I don't give a shit. I've failed so many times in my life at different things. I can fail again. I don't care. I'll do dumbass stuff and ruin things. I don't, if I lived in fear of, I need to do it this way or else I can't sell it, or I need to do it this way, I need to do it that way because this is what the market demands. Fuck the market, let's create a new one. I refuse to be bound by those conventional restrictions.
Awesome. I love it. Tell me about, you mentioned kind of the happy accident, living in fear of starting the brand and doing all the paperwork. So tell me about that process of starting your own brand.
It's terrifying.
And finding all the logistics.
So, I did have a lot of help along the way, not just through the Tuttles, but also through their lawyer, Judy, who everybody knows Judy. So Judy helped me out a lot, getting everything started with all the paperwork. And once I became accustomed to it, I'm like, okay, I'm used to this, and then other states pop up. I'm like, okay, I can do all this for Chicago now. I can do all this for Washington. I understand. But, again, it's about jumping off the cliff. You'll live in fear being like, I don't know, there's too much. What should I do with this? Should I just sell it to friends and, keep it for myself, or should I start a business? I don't know. But then, once you start, you can't stop. And it's hard to stop a freight train. And I feel like right now we're that freight train.
Tell me about choosing your name and choosing your kind of aesthetic.
So that took a long time, debating on names. Names were really tough. Ended up on Libertine, just because of my general lifestyle and my history at Reed. That continues to current day. But I feel it represents us as a brand quite well. Also our complete neglect for any type of cultural norms. in pushing the boundaries that we do. And then, what was the other question? Sorry.
You sort of overall aesthetic, the look and the name.
So I started off, again, I'm just going to be honest here. Olga did kind of her own project in 2015 called the Boyar Wedding Feast. And she put like this painting on the front. It was like an old Russian wedding banquet, I think, or something like that. And I noticed how drawn people were to that label with no words or anything on the front. And if it's over 150 years, it's free to use. Both of which things spoke to me a lot. Free. So admittedly, I totally ripped off her idea. And I started, I was looking at old classical crazy paintings, and I think the first one I found this picture online, and I was like, now that I've seen it, I can't not use it. And so that was the first two vintages of what we used on the front. And I was like, when I start using other vineyards and other varietals, I'll just use different classical paintings and things like that. And I also like the idea of having no words on the front, because having worked on the retail side for so long, I'm recognizing it exists, but people buy on the fucking label 90+%. They just do. It's what happens, and there's no getting around it. Unless somebody puts a bottle in their hand and says, buy this, they buy on the label. And so I didn't put any words on the front because it forces the consumer to pick it up and turn it around to see what it is. And then the bottle's in their hand, and that's half the battle. And if the bottle's in their hand and they like it, they're not really inclined to put it back down. So it's a bit of marketing psychology that I just kind of picked up along the way. And there are a lot of other little things, but I think having worked in the retail as a buyer and reseller helped out immensely in how I market my own wines. And then I started changing things up with other labels in different designs. And again, everybody's like, you have to have a brand that's recognizable. It needs to look the same. Everybody needs to know exactly what. And my whole marketing strategy has been the opposite George episode of Seinfeld. So I do everything the opposite of what everybody in the industry expects people to do. And when you do that, you're making a gigantic risk, but it ends up working. So none of my labels are brand identified. So kind of what I'm trying to do, and I have new ones in the pipeline that don't look anything like any of these. I don't want brand recognition based on label. I want brand recognition of what is that crazy idiot going to do next. And again, if somebody sees a crazy label from somebody else, they'll probably be like, hey, that's probably that guy. And then when it's not, they're like, oh. So it's things like that I kind of go after. And plus, I like pretty pictures. And I like what I see, and why not put it on a fucking bottle, So.
On that same note, you also have some interesting names for your wines. Tell us about like Acid Freak Rosé, for example, or Hopped Up on Goofballs.
So the Acid Freak started the Acid Freak and the Dolcetto, 2017. That was the first year I made anything other than just Riesling. So that fall of 2017 is when I first released my 2015 and 2016 Rieslings. So I took out a brand new white wine in November, which was the worst idea ever. And so I just hit the market with a big thump. I mean, nobody buying anywhere. I was like, what did I do with my life? I'm totally fucked. I'm going to have to start all over again. And I was like, whatever, nope. And then I have all this fucking wine in barrel. I was like, what am I going to do? And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to stop and take everything off the market. I'm not going to try to sell anymore. I took a trip to Mexico, ate a bunch of LSD that I smuggled into the country, chilled out on a beach for a week, came back and kind of started rethinking my approach to sales and marketing, because what I was doing wasn't working. I was tasting through barrels that I had sitting there, and then I had that one barrel of the Accident, and I didn't even know I was going to make a separate wine out of it. Okay, so what happened was I got a bunch of Dolcetto from Sunnyside Vineyard, and I got, I think, like 3.5 barrels of it or something out of the press. And there's not much you can do with a half barrel after it's done fermenting, because then it has a ton of headspace and you're screwed. You know, you'd have to put, you know, an inner gas over it every other day. And so it was still fermenting. I was like, I'll deal with it later. Riesling always comes in at the end of the season. And so I was pressing off my Riesling. I had filled up the holding tank. It was late at night and I had extra in the press pan. I didn't feel like cleaning anything else. It wasn't enough to put in there. So it was born out of laziness and lack of space. And I looked over at the half full Dolcetto barrel and said, fuck it. I've had Riesling from Piedmont before. Just pumped it into the barrel just to get rid of it. And it co-fermented and it was lovely. And so when I came back and tasted it before bottling, I was like, you know what, this could be really good. And so I did some blending trials and ended up doing 50-50 Dolcetto Riesling. And so it's not like a red post-ferment mixed with a white post-ferment. You know, it's like a lot of people are like, oh, you can't blend red and, you know, white finished wine. Well, it's not, you know, it's rosé. But anyway, it was delicious. And so, and that one I did as an homage to kind of, you know, my sitting down and realizing I needed to change my approach and what I was doing while still keeping what I was doing, you know, and it's just like life. There's so many different facets and so many different directions in what you're into, you know. It's like, let's let the brand reflect that as well. And so then I Googled psychedelic image and found the picture of the lady on the beach from Larry Carlson. And I was like, this is amazing. This is it, you know. And so I contacted him, bought the rights to it, and then used that as the label, and then released it with the Dolcetto Caravaggio and another Riesling. And when I took those out into the market, and I had people taste the rosés first and then the Rieslings, I sold so much fucking Riesling. Rather than showing up with 2 Rieslings and being like, hey, I'm this little guy, you want to buy some Riesling? You know, it just doesn't work. And that's really what propelled me into a different arena. And then I was like, hey, you know, if this works in this branding that isn't even similar at all, like, let's just blow it out of proportion and make nothing match at all. And so that's kind of where I've been going. And the fact that, you know, you can do something so stupid and have it work is just so gratifying to me.
Tell me about Hopped Up on Goofballs.
So that one, going back even further, I think again it was like the 2017 harvest. Derek Brown, who used to work with Teutonic, he was my cellar buddy. And, you know, I think I can say their name now because they're not in business anymore. Bridgeport came out with like a rosé IPA, and we were like, get the fuck out of here with that shit. Like, oh, you soak the barley to get the color off of that, you know, and be like, because they're just trying to get in on our cash cow. Because let's look at everything in economics, right? Rosé is fashionable because it's a quick way for winemakers to make cash and pay their farmers. That's all it is. It's like Beaujolais Nouveau. You know, it's just a way to get cash flow. So it's fantastic that it's taking off. But you also can't sell for as much. So there's a lot of give and take. But anyway, we were upset that they had stepped onto our court, if you will. And so we were joking that we should, you know, make a wine and throw a bunch of fucking hops in it, you know, and join their hops arms race. And so the line I like to use is, if you're going to play on our court, we're going to dunk all over your ass. And so not that year, because I didn't have anything I wanted to sacrifice. But the next year, I really shit the bed on this one batch of wine, because I was like, I'm King Natty and I don't need to use sulfites at this period. I'm so great. And I totally fucked up the wine. It was not pleasant to me. I didn't enjoy it. So I was like, I wonder what happens if I add a bunch of hops. So I did some blending trials, added a bunch of hops to it. All the flaws became imperceptible, and now people love the wine. So again, it's a lot of things go wrong. It's figuring out how to make them right. So instead of just putting shit down the drain, you figure out another way to do it. create a market that doesn't exist, and make some money. And now I learned my lesson of what not to do in wine production, and not get over arrogant in terms of, well, I'll still push limits, but it just fixed it. So, and then this year, I again didn't have any raw material I was really willing to part with, but I did sacrifice 1 barrel and just made the hopped up on Goofballs for the Seattle market, because Seattle did extremely well with it. It got into a bunch of super fancy places up there that I really respect and love them, like Lorsaw, Vinny's Raw Bar, which I'm not sure is open anymore. And but anyway, they did really well with it, so I just made it for the Seattle market. Portland didn't do okay. I mean, I sold 6 bottles to Belmont Station, which is just a good ego boost, but they probably still have 2 of them. I saw the other day somebody posted it on Instagram, and Hollywood Liquor bought like 6 cases from the very beginning. And they were like, I just got this at Hollywood Liquor for $12, which is $4 less than what I sold it to them for. I was like, shit, I should buy some of that and go send it to Seattle. But it's things like that. Certain things work in certain markets and they don't in others. I mean, I could be offended all day long that they're selling it for $12 a bottle, or I could just not give a shit and laugh it off. Yeah. But anyway, it's a really cool wine. I was shocked at how well the hops integrated, and it's tasty, So I'm happy with it. Am I going to keep doing it? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I'll probably just find something dumber to do.
Make a bigger mistake, fix it some other way. Well, we've also done some interesting things with one of your Rieslings, which is made with Botrytis. So tell me about that one.
Yeah, so that was 2016. Botrytis is a unique beast in Oregon. Certain vintages, it can grow really well. Other vintages, and a lot of people spray for it, so it doesn't even show up. And then if the rains come, it turns into this gross pink slime. I mean, it's really vintage based on how Botrytis shows up and whether it's worth it. So in 16, it was pretty heavily Botrytisized, and you know what? I'm very, very growing season based in my winemaking style. Having worked vineyards for so long, I realize how different everything is, and so I'll change my technique every year based upon how the fruit comes in the door at the very end. And so that year I was like, well, shit, I mean, this is really pretty. So I just stepped all over it and let it soak in a cold room for 5 or 6 days. Like, it was a really long time. And in one of the techniques I found, if you just step on it and let it soak, even if it's in a cold room, it'll start going volatile pretty quickly. So you have to keep stepping on it every single day and moving it around and mushing it around, and you do have to put a teeny bit of sulfite as a protective, over the top. And you could put an inner gas over the top to protect as well over that. Anyway, boring shit. Anyway, so I just really wanted to showcase the Botrytis, so I want to let it soak with the skins and the juice for a long time. And then pressed it off, barrel fermented it, and I don't halt ferment. I don't try to make my wines any particular style. I try to let them create themselves as much as they can. And so, some of my Rieslings have 10 grams per liter RS, some have 23, some have 0. It's just what it wants to do. In that year, it went bone dry. So it's like a bone dry, Botrytis-sized Riesling, so this is my aging palette right here. So I still have like 5 or 6 cases of it. And I open them periodically to see how they go over the years. My arrogant goal is to have a purely natty wine have a 10-year shelf life, at least. So far, we're doing pretty good. So we're just going to keep it rolling as much as we can. But yeah, I'm really proud of that wine. And you know what? I never made it again because the vintage conditions didn't, account for that. And so, some years, I'll do skin contact, cold macerations. Some years I won't. I'm like, this fruit, isn't as pretty as I thought it would be. Or, it's like, it's got some like a teeny bit of black rot on it. Let's just fucking get it in the press and let it get it off, So it's all those things kind of come into play when you're making things that are vintage based. Like take, for example, the Syrah that I started getting from the Willamette Valley. I had no idea how to make it. I've never fucked with Syrah before. And when it came in, the acid was, through the roof, and the bricks, the sugar content was really low. And I was like, this is going to be a really low alcohol wine. I was like, what am I going to do with this? So I made it wrong 3 ways. I made it into a direct press white wine. I did a 4-day cold soak heavy rosé, and then a red wine. And the way they developed differently, like the direct press had way higher alcohol. The direct press was like 11.5, and then the red was like 9.95, both bone dry. There's all sorts. I'm not a Scientologist. I don't understand how all this shit works. I just know what happens. And so I really like the varied expressions of it. And by doing that first year, I'm like, hey, the red wine was my favorite expression, the white being my second favorite expression. This year, what am I going to do? I have no idea. We'll see what the grapes look like at harvest. What sold the best and for the most, the red. Am I concerned about the money? Kind of, but I'll do whatever I think is whatever the growing season dictates, in my opinion.
That's what I was going to ask you about that, because you don't have a ton of production experience, and yet you feel the confidence to make those kinds of decisions kind of on the fly, not really going into each season with a set goal in mind, but kind of reacting. So tell me about building the knowledge and confidence to make those kinds of decisions in the moment.
We made a lot of wine at Teutonic. I feel fully confident in all of my abilities from my experience and mentorship from Barnaby. 100%.
So what do you, are there still tools that you haven't used yet that you're excited to try? Are there things that you're like, are solutions to problems that haven't arisen yet that you're excited to try out?
Fuck if I know, they'll happen. It's, again, if you try to, predict the future, you're going to be wrong every single time. Life comes at you fast, but it's true. Problems arise, you recognize them, you deal with them, you solve them, you move on. And that's just what's going to happen. I have zero idea what the future holds for Libertine. I have no idea. I'll just ride the train, see what happens. Yeah.
So going back a little bit to when you're getting started, tell me about finding vineyards you wanted to work with. What were you looking for in vineyard sites specifically, and as you've added beyond Riesling, what have you looked for in sites?
Initially, what I was looking for was somebody to sell to me. Being a nobody and starting off nowhere, you don't have the contacts. It's just hard to just find fruit. So I started off getting fruit from Lavelle Vineyard. I worked with them for 2 years. Moving on, in the years past, I've found other people to deal with, and I started focusing on, and plus as my vineyard experience grew, I now have the knowledge to give a cursory glance at any vineyard and tell you all of their farming practices in about 30 seconds. So that helps a lot. My relationship web has grown a lot. That helps as well. I now specifically seek out warm climate varietals in the Willamette Valley. It's no secret that our climate is changing ever so slightly. So I am kind of trying to get ahead of that by picking up the contracts of those areas, so now I'm working with Dolcetto, Tempranillo, Syrah. I've got some line on some Albarino that I might pick up. And I'm constantly putting, feelers out there. And again, it's shit nobody else wants to work with. And I learned that lesson, from Barnaby as well, he was picking up like Chaucelas, and Sylvaner when nobody wanted to touch that stuff, and the farmers were so grateful anybody would even take it off their hands and not put it as like a 1% blend in some Pinot Gris, and now it's super fashionable and it's hard to find. And it's that type of thing. I feel like with every new step the wine industry takes, it's all the shit nobody wanted before.
Hipster wine.
Yeah, and there'll probably be a backswing on that too. People will probably stop drinking Gamay. Oh, don't say that. But Gamay may not be fashionable in 10 to 15 years, and right now it's on fire. People are selling Gamay grapes for more than Pinot Noir in the Valley right now. It's bananas. So, and then Pet Nats. It's just lazy sparkling wine. Are people going to drink lazy sparkling wine in 20 years? Probably not. But right now, people just can't make enough of this stuff. And don't get me wrong, I like Pet Nat, nothing against anybody, but it's method ancestral, Just give me an old bougie Cerdon and I'll be fine. But yeah.
So one of the things you do is you make a number of wines that are kind of non-traditional in color, yellow, orange, etc. kinds of wines. Tell me about producing wines with those kind of colors, and then like you say, finding a market that doesn't exist, or fitting them into a place where people maybe aren't looking for them.
Well, again, I don't know the colors until right before bottling. They change so much. Like when I tried to do the direct press Syrah, the direct press Tempranillo, the shit's like a red wine in barrel when it's fermenting, and you're just like, I'm so screwed. What am I going to do with this? It's like, and then, all the color drops out after cold stabilization and like the sulfite right before bottling. And you learn that that's going to happen, so it doesn't freak you out too much. But I don't worry so much about the marketing aspect. I have really, really good partners and distributors who do a fantastic job. And really, the market right now for my generation and people younger than me, they want that stuff. They don't want to drink what their parents have been drinking. They don't give a shit about Robert Parker and his points, or like massive cabs, and flavor bombs that'll explode in your mouth, or stuff that'll pour like motor oil. They want something different and unique. Like themselves, but it's true, myself included. I don't want to drink run-of-the-mill shit. I want something that's crazy and out there, and luckily the market supports that right now. Again, will it forever? Probably not, but it does right now, and it works out really well for me. And yeah, it's just a nice convergence of everything together that I think why we've been, moderately successful so far. It's been almost all by accident, and yet so perfect at the same time. I'm very grateful for it.
So you've talked about this in a couple of your answers, but I'm curious if you had to define your winemaking philosophy, how would you define it?
Growing season dictated, and then fearlessness and ruthless experimentation. Should I bring him down here? Is that going to be loud?
All good.
Doesn't matter? Okay. I'd say fearlessness and ruthless experimentation. You can't be scared to try new things, and you should always be trying new things as much as you can, whether it's in small batch, large batch, whatever you can. Take, for example, the non-vintage Solera Riesling that I've been making. So in 2017, I had some excess, because you're really restricted when you do neutral barrel ferments and aging to 60 gallons, no more, no less. It needs to be fucking 60 gallons. So you have these 5 to 15 and a half gallon kegs of just extra stuff, and it's fun to screw around with them. So surface yeast grows in Oregon. Nobody wants to admit it or talk about it because it just means you're off your topping schedule on your Pinot. But so I did some sherry trials, non-fortified, with small batches of Riesling. To my delight, it worked really well. I really liked how it turned out. And then I was like, oh shit, I still need topping wine for my 17 Riesling. And so I used that to keep putting over the top. And so my 17 has a good portion, not a small portion of those sherry trials in them, right? And so when it came to bottling the 17, I initially I stopped because it's a massive fucking pain in the ass, but I was using these bottles for the first 3 years, and I could only get like 56 cases of them or something, and I had 70 to bottle, or yeah, somewhere around there. And so it left me with a half barrel. And I was like, well, what the shit am I gonna do? And I was like, you know what? I'll let it oxidize and sherry it. And there's a couple tricks that I use, non-intervention wise, that involve, you know, moving things around, minor sulfite program, and CO2 to be able, so it doesn't get the what I call Jesus wine, you know, the oxidized communion wine. So it doesn't get that flavor to it, but it develops quite nicely. And so I let that half barrel go. When the fruit came from the same vineyard the next year, and it came out of the press, I put some of that juice and filled the rest of the barrel up, let it re-ferment, and then let that process happen again, and then bottled 20 cases of these little guys. And so this has 17 and 18 in it. Then when I did the same thing when it came in 19, and so now the barrel's, you know, oxidizing again with 17, 18, 19, and then in like August or September I'll bottle another 20 cases of those, and just keep it rolling as long as I possibly can. And again, it's like that wine only exists because I couldn't get enough glass. Otherwise, I never would have done it. And it's little logistical things like that that come into play more often than you would expect, and how you deal with them. Like you say, you know, what's next? Who knows what's going to happen next time? You know, when something forces your hand, you have to make decisions on the fly, and then you come up with a product that, you know, doesn't exist. Is that going to define Oregon Riesling in the future? No. You know, it's not going to be our sherry. It's not going to be anything like that. But maybe somebody will see it and be like, hey, what if we did this on top of that, and it snowballs into something and becomes totally unique? You know, Madeira didn't start off as fucking Madeira being like put up in somebody's attic. Bullshit. The only reason it went on that, you know, ship out there, you know the story of Madeira? The story of Madeira is that they put barrels, because their wine sucks because it's such a hot climate, they put a bunch of barrels on an old-timey ship. It went to go sell it somewhere in like Southeast Asia, and then 2 barrels made the trip back that they forgot about, and after all the heat and everything, they're like, wow, this is delicious, it got cooked. So it's cooked wine, essentially, and now they put it up in hot-ass attics to make it, and it's a luxury product. And it's stuff like that, you know. Is that story true? No, they probably just couldn't sell it, and it got too hot. You know, it's, you know, and sherry didn't start as fucking sherry. Champagne, somebody probably just, something re-fermented in the bottle, you know, and they were like, wow, this tastes pretty good. How about we start developing this technique? You know, there's all this legend to it, but really what happened, it was an accident. You know, somebody forgot about somebody fucked something up, and now it's like, it defines a region. And so little things like that happen all the time, and don't end up panning out. But, you know, that's what I love about wine. It is so varied. You know, that new thing could happen. It could, and completely redefine a region.
So I'm curious, as someone who wants to constantly sort of push forward and try new things and like you say, force your own hand, the pendulum swings back, and suddenly that's not in fashion anymore. Would you pivot to be a more traditional winemaker, or would you keep trying the same thing you're trying?
I'd absolve the brand and do something in a different industry. It's what I would do. I mean, if what I'm doing isn't making me money, I'm not just going to be some chump making over-oaked, you know, Pinot Noir, trying to sell it with guys driving yellow Corvettes. I don't give a shit about them, you know? I mean, everything has its place, right? But it's not for me. And so that thing can still exist. I don't, you know, great. And sometimes I like to drink it. I mean, I'll just throw out a name. I fucking love Beaufrere. The wine's delicious. It's delicious, right? Is it what I would make? Absolutely not. I'd never do that. But, you know, it's one of those things. No, I would not change anything I'm doing at all. You know, if what I'm doing isn't accepted in the market, I'd just pivot and do something else.
So you mentioned before we started that you're working in a new space now. So tell me about the logistics of setting yourself up in a new place, new vineyard sites, and a new winemaking facility.
Yeah, so the new facility will be fun. there's certain base equipment in any winery that you just know your way around. But it will take some time to get used to, a lot of it is logistical placement of flow of movement. A lot of which, Barnaby and I had worked in very, very small spaces, making lots and lots and lots of wine. So I got very, very good at, placing things around, and, both of us, it's like, you just figure it out, man. It becomes like a second nature to you. So learning a new space will present its own challenges. I'm sure I'll, stack shit in my way a million times before I don't. But it's just part of the deal. It'll be strange to make wine back out in wine country again, instead of, along Powell, which again, both of them have their positives, It's like along Powell, it's like, oh shit, the fruit delivery's late. Let's walk down the street and get some whiskey, So, and, out there, it's like, oh, I guess I'll set up my tent, So, I mean, it'll be a lot of challenges, but I mean, that's the fun of it, right? If I did the same thing over and over again every year, I'd want to blow my brains out. And so, I like being presented with new things and challenges, because otherwise, you lose your passion. You just stop caring, and it just becomes motions, Mm-hmm. And who wants to do that?
You talked earlier about basically trying to double-ish or about double your size this year. As you look for new things to do, what else is on the horizon for you in terms of things you want to try, varietals you want to work with or want to try to find, or projects you want to undertake? Again,
like I said, warm climate varietals, Riesling. So I don't think I mentioned this on camera yet, but we manage a 3-acre Riesling vineyard that was planted in 1990. Barncat, it's in Sherwood. It is 100 feet from the boundary of the Chehalem Mountains AVA. So Chehalem Mountains AVA. And so that's where I like to spend a lot of my time in messing around in that vineyard. And I try different like pruning tactics and things like that. Nothing, fancy or anything. One thing I have had in mind is, if my whole thing is that I really like the idea of not having overhead and being tied to something. I like to be stone free and be able to fly anytime I want. Talking about absolving the brand, my daughter's 12. When she turns 18, am I still going to make wine? Maybe not. Maybe I'll go do something else. But if I have a winery and a press and like all this equipment, I'm tied to it and I'm married to it. I can't leave it, So I try not to have those types of things anchoring me down. But there is one region in Oregon that I've been spying that nobody's touched, that is relatively untouched, even in terms of where people live, that I think would be absolutely impeccable for growing Riesling. Do I want to buy land there and start a Riesling vineyard that's not even going to produce fruit for 5 years and put all that money and labor in to something that might not even work? Maybe. But, I have ideas, but I'll probably never do it. And then once I decide I'm not going to do it, I'll tell other people so they can. Mm-hmm. But I've studied the soil, studied the climatology. I think it's totally right, man. But I'm just not willing as an individual to make that investment in tying myself down to something like that. I don't think people understand what the work managing vineyards takes. Mm-hmm. It is a lot, like all the fucking time. It's really, really difficult. It's more than you would ever expect. And I don't think the people who work the vineyards get nearly enough credit for what they do. You mentioned that was one of the things you were kind of proud of earlier, was your vineyard knowledge, now being able to kind of scope a site pretty quickly and decide if it was a site that intrigued you. Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me about that, developing that, and learning about the work that goes into vineyards, and what surprised you about it.
Again, how difficult it is. I mean, and how non-financially viable it is. Really, I mean, farms don't make money. They just don't make money unless it's massive, like on a huge scale. But I mean, it's just surprising they even exist. in terms of people making money. That's what I was most surprised by, how quickly the vines grow. Like during certain days or weeks in the summer, I mean, you can watch them grow. It's bananas. And they take so much care and attention, and they can get away from you so quickly. And, I've had years where, I've shit the bed. I think if you do everything perfectly every year, you're fucking lying. And so I'm more willing and ready to admit when I do screw up, because, everybody does and everybody learns from them and moves on. And, I've had vintages where I definitely shit the fucking bed. In other ones where it's been fantastic, and I realized what I did. I don't make the same mistakes again, and go on from there. And try different canopy management styles, try different spray programs, try different, all these different things, and you just get a certain touch for it. And now I think I'm in a comfortable position, but it took a while to get there. I mean, what is this? I think it's my 7th growing season, so. And I feel like I barely have a grasp on it,
So one thing I thought was interesting you talked about earlier was about your people your generation and younger, how they're looking for different and unique things to try, not necessarily their parents' wine. I'm curious, as you've been in the industry, has that changed? Is that something that's newer each year, or has that always been the case since you've been in the industry? Are people always looking for non-traditional wine?
I feel it changes based on the market. So when I started making wines, and I was like, okay, I'm going to make natty ass wines. I'm not going to add shit. I'm not going to filter. I'm not going to fine. I'm going to use wild yeast and all this stuff. And then I saw what's going on just in, Portland. And I was like, damn, man, I am this is so passe. This is over. What am I doing? I'm I'm getting into this way late in the game. And then I started talking to distributors on the East Coast. This shit hasn't started yet. It hasn't even started. The wave isn't even cresting. It's spreading like wildfire too. I always joke, I go back to the East Coast pretty regularly, and I always joke with them, I'll be like, okay, this is what you're going to be drinking in 5 to 10 years, because this is what's cool now in Oregon. And they're like, oh, shut up, we're not going to drink that sour beer, that shit's gross. I go back there in 5 years, they're like, check out this sour, oh, this sour. It's like clockwork. You can totally predict what's going to be big on the East Coast by what's been happening. Portland's like an incubator. It's crazy. I just watch it happen, and it predicts other markets. It's kind of bananas. And again, I think I'm behind the times, and yet it's just starting, and it's catching on, So. And every place goes through their own natural development, no pun intended. But it's one of those things where you can watch it happen in real time and know it's like looking into the future, and it's working out really, really well for me. So, and it kind of is like a joke, but it's true. I was talking to one of my distributors, or my distributor up in Washington, and he was like, so why natural wine? And I'm like, well, a little guy like me making big over oaked shit, trying to sell to rich people, that's not going to work. Of course I have to do it this way. And then of course I have to do it this way because it's a lot cheaper. I don't have to pay for finding or filtering. I don't have to pay for additives. I don't have to do all this shit. And it's, is it, a better way to do things in a philosophical way? Yeah, probably. I love doing it this way. I feel it's really way more challenging to know that if you screw something up, you can't add something to fix it other than hops. And so, but it makes you way closer with your wines, tasting them constantly, making sure the process of fermentation is going the way you want it, and taking interventionist ways, like if something's going reductive, give it more oxygen. If something's starting to slow down and ferment, but you'd like it to go faster because it end up, like with 100 grams per liter residual sugar. Then you put it up higher in the stack so it's warmer up in the ceiling. So it, it cranks it up a little bit, stir the leaves a little bit, get them going around. Don't add a bunch of fucking yeast nutrient or like DAP to try to, it's like giving it crack cocaine, but anyway, so I think it's more fun for me to do things that way. But look at the practical and economic side. Yeah, it's cheaper and easier. And again, the old joke I like to use, I think, filtering, in my experience, tasting it going in and out, it's like fornicating with a prophylactic. It takes away all the feeling and all the fun out of it. And so it strips it of its true beauty, I think. Mm-hmm. A lot of people disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm not making their wine, everybody has their own approach. Is mine right? No. Is theirs right? Probably not either. Nobody's right. It's just what you want to do for your own thing. It's like your own little world. Mm-hmm. And if people accept it, great. And if they don't, I'll go work at New Seasons again.
Sell someone else's wine.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious about the step for you from being an assistant for such an interesting and unique place like Teutonic and working with Barnaby and then taking the step. What were the biggest maybe surprises or challenges for you making your own product entirely on your own versus working for another company? What were the biggest challenges to your winemaking / sales perspective, I guess, as you stepped out on your own?
Challenges.
Opportunities?
I would say, I did bring up earlier about how hard it was just taking out Riesling on the market, and that was a crash and burn. Really, in the market, we are very, very lucky and appreciative to have had great success. So really, since that initial push, it's been really, really, really nice and not challenging. In terms of, I'd say the difficulty of making wine in Barnaby's space would be sneaking in extra barrels every year without him noticing. No, I mean, I had such a wonderful time at Teutonic. I learned so much from Barnaby. I feel more making my own wine in the space. With Teutonic's wines, I would make the wines as Teutonic would want them, as Barnaby would want them. I would never, deviate from anything that wasn't Teutonic. I'm an employee. I'm making those wines, specifically those wines, for and with them. And so doing my own, I'd say I really liked the freedom to be like, I can make these in any fucking style I want. I'm trying to think of a better way to put that. But yeah, with Teutonic's wines, I was always concerned with, I want these to taste like Teutonic wines. Mm-hmm. And I guess one of the challenges was making mine not taste like Teutonic wines, because that's the only way I had made wines before. Mm-hmm. I think I succeeded in that greatly. We have pretty similar core approaches, and again, that's because he fucking taught me. We have pretty similar core approaches, but then we diverge pretty quickly and go on different sides of the spectrum. I guess the challenge was just learning my own lessons and fucking up on my own. Yeah. Yeah, that was a tough one for me. Yeah, I don't know. But again, we've been very, very lucky of how receptive people have been to our wines. So we're very grateful for that.
So I heard you earlier when you say you have no idea what's happening next for Libertine wines, and that's fine. But I'm curious if that does eliminate one of the questions I was going to ask you. But I'm curious if you have Is there something that if you left the industry today, you would feel like you hadn't accomplished it? Is there something you still want to accomplish? Is there a size you want to get to, or a product you want to create that you haven't done yet?
I never want to make more than 1,500 cases a year, ever. That's, I've talked to a lot of people in the industry. I've seen a lot. I've run a lot of business plans. I'm capping out at 1,500. I'll never make more than that. I can do all that by myself. Maybe a teeny bit of help, but that's one of the only restriction I've placed on myself. I really don't feel like I've pushed the boundaries enough. I feel like there's more out there I haven't even thought about because the opportunity hasn't presented itself. There's more, I don't know. I mean, I just don't feel like we've been stupid enough. I just want to get stupider. So yeah, I have no idea. I kind of fly by the seat of my pants in pretty much every single thing that I do. So I'm sure plenty of opportunities will present themselves for new styles. Certainly that Solera stuff is one of the ones I'm most proud of, because that's not something you see every day anywhere in any region. And I want to do more things like that. Whether they're good or not, that's for people to decide. But I think the more stuff we do like that is for everybody. The more we push the boundaries, the more we'll learn about ourselves and our region.
Tell me, someone trying your wine for the first time, what would be the ultimate takeaway you'd like to hear from them? The ultimate either compliment or reaction to trying one of your wines?
I've never had anything like this. Always. I've never had anything like this. I just want it to be, I make some stuff, like the Dolcetto is really, really pretty. It's a really nice 4-day skin contact rosé. In 2 years, 17 and 19, it's beautiful. It's a nice drinking wine. 18 was bananas because the acidity was so high. I knew it wasn't going to go through mallow. It did in 19. But in 18, I knew it wouldn't go through mallow. So that's why I gave it 4 days, was because I wanted it to be a bridge to a red wine. So the secondary fermentation of malolactic, pretty much every single red goes through it. I taste a lot of red wines before they've gone through mallow, and they're like raw and like astringent and just like, ah. And I really like them. And the consumer never sees it. It's just a product that doesn't exist. So that's what I tried to do in 18, was bridge that gap. It's not a full red, it only had 4 days, but it was enough. It was tannic, it was crazy acidic, it didn't go through mallow, and it was like a product that doesn't exist. And I just want to expose people more to that. Again, it's like I can just make run-of-the-mill bullshit, and sell it and make money. But again, where's the fun in that? It's like I want to make things that don't fit into a box, that surprise people and kind of shock them. Because again, that's what I like to drink.
What do you see for the future of Oregon wine in general? What is the industry going to look like in the next decade?
I feel like there are two divergent markets, and again, I could be completely wrong. I'm not an expert in the Oregon wine market, but it's just what I see. What I see is a lot of outside money coming in, a lot, and I think with Oregon's prominence, we're only going to see more of that, and I think we're going to have. Instead of all the people that are in the middle right now, I think we're going to see more of the extremes. I think we're going to see the big money, big houses, and I think we're going to see a lot more small people like me. And I see small people like me, and I'm still tiny, like coming up all the time. And I don't see it as competition. I think of it as a good thing. The more of us there are, there's strength in numbers, and and they're going to be like the little people, the little independents, and they're going to be the massive houses. And that's what I see. And the massive houses are just going to perpetuate the norm. They're going to be pumping out, Oaky Pinot and Chard, and giving that market what it wants. And people drink it. People like it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just what it is. It exists. I'm not saying anything's wrong or right. That'd be a pretty shitty thing for me to do. But people should have the choice of what they want to drink, and I think only more people like myself are going to come out, and more people that see how successful we are on the smaller side. More people are going to take that jump into production and start doing it themselves, and see it as like an inspiration. Be like, hey, I can do this, and I can make it work as a business. I'm not a businessman. I'm barely even a winemaker, so, but somehow it works, so I think the more people see that, the more is going to come up, but it's going to polarize for sure. That middle road is going to disappear pretty quickly. And if it does still exist, it's going to be owned by somebody else. You know what I'm saying? Like they're going to start buying people up. So anybody who wants to buy a Libertine, call me.
We'll post your number on the
5 million
website.
minimum.
And percentage on the back end, of course.
Yeah.
All right. Last question for you, a little philosophical question for you. What is wine's role in society?
There's the default of saying that it brings people together and everybody sits around a table and enjoys wine and blah, blah, blah. It's pretty self-important. What's wine's role in society? I mean, I think it serves a lot of ego feeding. I think people like to feel really important by it. Again, vague modifier. But, wine's role, again, you can default all the bullshit. It's an expression of a region, it dictates the style of a people in a culture. All of that's true. Beyond the run-of-the-mill answers. I'm going to go back to the polarizing answer. I think it's how people define themselves, and it's an expression of how people define themselves. Do they see themselves as part of the elite power structure, or do they see themselves as part of a grassroots individualistic movement? And people buy things that reflect their personalities and themselves. And so it's just another reinforcement of that. It's when I don't do tastings anymore because I fucking hate it. But anytime I did tastings and like an old couple would come up to me, and I know you can just tell by looking at them what they're into, and I'd be like, this is gonna be a disaster. And they come up and I get this all the time, like, oh no, and it's that type of thing. And then there are other people who are like, what the fuck is this? Is really cool, and I think it's that part that wine serves, is just a reflection of a culture and a people, no matter what it is. Pretty vague, but
I knew you'd have a good answer for that.
Yeah.
That's all the questions we have for you today. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover today that you would like to have covered?
No, I think we're all good. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, for your stories.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to me.
Anytime. Appreciate it. We'll go and let you off the hook.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.